Moscow, 1993. A police officer lies on a hospital table. He was shot twice through his body armor at a range of less than 10 meters. The armor stopped nothing. The rounds passed through the ceramic plate, through the backing material, and through him. He is alive because the shooter missed the organs that would have killed him instantly. His colleagues who examined the scene and the rounds recovered from the wall behind him reached a conclusion that had been building for several years. The standard Russian service pistol was useless. Not against unprotected target, against anyone wearing the kind of body armor that had become, by the early 1990s, readily available to the organized criminal groups who had taken over significant portions of the Russian economy following the Soviet collapse. The armor that had been designed to protect soldiers was now protecting criminals. And the pistol that every Russian police officer, every FSB officer, every GRU operative carried on their hip could not defeat it. The Makarov PM fired a 9x18mm round that had been designed in 1946 for one specific purpose. It was powerful enough to kill a man who was not wearing armor. It was compact enough to fit inside a pistol, small enough for a soldier to carry without noticing it, and it was deliberately designed to be incompatible with NATO weapons, so that captured Soviet ammunition could not be turned against Soviet forces. That last design decision had made sense in 1946. In the criminal wars of Moscow in 1993, it was irrelevant. What mattered was that the 9x18mm round fired from a Makarov at a man in a titanium and Kevlar vest transferred most of its energy to the plate and delivered almost none of it to the person behind the plate. The Soviet army had known this problem was coming. They had commissioned work on a replacement pistol before the Soviet Union even collapsed. The program was codenamed Grak, the Rook, a chess piece. The program's purpose was to find a new pistol for the new Russia, a weapon that could do something the Makarov could not. The man who had the answer worked at a design bureau in the town of Klimovsk, 25 kilometers south of Moscow, inside the Central Research Institute of Precision Machine Building. His name was Pyotr Serdyukov, and the weapon he designed was named after a snake, Gyurza, the blunt-nosed viper, Macrovipera lebetina, a pit viper native to the Soviet republics of Central Asia, known for a venom that destroys red blood cells and causes catastrophic internal bleeding. The engineers at Klimovsk, who named the cartridge after it, understood the reference. What the Girza cartridge did inside a human body when it got there was not entirely different from what the snake's venom did. The problem was getting there. Serdyukov had been working at TSNIITOCHMASH since 1972, recruited into a department specifically established to design weapons for Special Forces operations. He had already produced the VSS Vintores sniper rifle, the AS-Val silent assault rifle, and several specialized devices for KGB and military diving units. He understood weapons not as symbols of power, but as engineering solutions to specific operational problems. And the operational problem in front of him in the early 1990s was stated precisely. The pistol must defeat body armor at 50 meters, it must carry at least 18 rounds, it must be controllable, and it must do all of this in a weapon a person can carry and conceal. Every part of that requirement created a contradiction. Defeating body armor at 50 meters from a pistol requires a cartridge generating significantly more energy than standard pistol rounds. More energy means more pressure. More pressure means more recoil. More recoil means less controllability and more weight to manage the forces involved. More weight means a larger, heavier pistol. A larger, heavier pistol is harder to conceal and harder to carry for long periods. Somewhere in that chain of trade-offs, pistol designers had always stopped. The energy required to defeat armor is incompatible with the size and weight constraints of a concealable sidearm. Serdyukov solved it not in the pistol but in the bullet. The 9x21mm Gyurza cartridge is not a standard design. Most bullets are a single component, a jacket, a core, and a base. The Girza SP-10 round has three components, a hardened steel subcaliber core, a polyethylene separation layer, and an outer bimetallic sleeve that surrounds and contains the core during flight. These three components behave differently depending on what the bullet hits. Against an unarmored target, the sleeve and the core stay together on impact. The full diameter of the round transfers into the target. The wound channel is wide, the damage is severe, The bullet behaves like a conventional high-powered round. Against an armoured target, something different happens. The moment the bullet contacts the armour plate, the outer sleeve is stripped away. The polyethylene layer compresses and is displaced. What continues through the armour is only the hardened steel core. Approximately 6.7 grams of heat-strengthened steel moving at 410 meters per second. The plate has defeated the sleeve, it has not defeated the core. At 50 meters, the SP-10 round will penetrate two 1.2mm titanium plates separated by a gap, plus 30 layers of Kevlar behind them. This is not a theoretical result. This is what the round does in testing, consistently, against the armour standards the Russian military used to evaluate the program. The pistol designed around this cartridge, the SR-1 Vector, carries 18 rounds in a double-stack magazine. It fires from a short recoil locked breech mechanism using a tilting locking piece under the barrel. The frame is polymer, which keeps weight down without sacrificing structural strength. The trigger has an integrated safety that must be deliberately pressed to fire. So does the grip, two independent safety mechanisms, neither requiring a manual switch, both defeated by the natural motion of firing the weapon. The loaded pistol weighs 1,180 grams. For comparison, a loaded Makarov weighs 810 grams. The Gyurza is heavier, it is also roughly 50% more effective at range, carries more than twice the rounds, and will defeat body armour the Makarov cannot. The army ran the GRAC trials. The Girza competed. It outperformed the other entries in armour penetration by a significant margin. The evaluation panel then made a decision that frustrated Serdukov and his team at Klimovsk for years afterward. They chose the 9x19mm Yarygin pistol instead. The reasoning was logistics. The Russian military was moving toward compatibility with NATO cartridge standards. The 9x19mm Parabellum round was the most widely produced pistol cartridge on Earth. Ammunition was available everywhere. The supply chain was simple. The Girza cartridge, for all its engineering elegance, required dedicated production of a round that nothing else in the inventory fired. In a military that was struggling with supply chains, budgets, and the bureaucratic chaos of a collapsing state apparatus, the Girza was too specialized. The army walked away from it? If you're finding this examination of Soviet weapons engineering of interest, subscribing to the channel helps ensure you do not miss the next one. The FSB did not walk away from it. The Federal Security Service, successor to the KGB, had a different operational calculus than the army. Their officers did not work in battalions with shared supply lines. They worked in small teams in specific operations against specific targets. The kind of targets who, in the Russia of the early to mid-1990s, were increasingly arriving to encounters wearing body armour, organised criminal groups with access to military surplus. Former security service personnel working in private protection. Well-resourced adversaries who had learned that armour was available and useful. The FSB adopted the SR-1 Vector in 1996 under the designation SR-1 for their officers and units. The Federal Protective Service, the FSO, the Russian state VIP protection unit responsible for guarding the president, also adopted it. The OMON Police Special Forces units and SOBR Rapid Response units acquired it in numbers. In 2003, an improved version of the pistol was formally designated the SPS, the Serdukov self-loading pistol, and adopted for broader military and government use. The pistol that the army had rejected in favour of a simpler logistical solution is now carried by the men who guard Vladimir Putin. The Gyurza cartridge's performance against body armour created a secondary problem that the designers had anticipated, but that became more significant as the weapon entered service. What the round does to armour, it also does, in modified form, to vehicles. The SP-10 round at 100 meters will penetrate the door of a standard automobile. It will pass through the door, and through the occupant, and through the far door, and continue. At close range, it will penetrate the windscreen glass, the vehicle body, and the driver. This is not a side effect, it is an intended capability. The Russian security services in the 1990s were dealing with adversaries who used vehicles both as transportation and as cover. A pistol round that cannot stop a vehicle ambush is a pistol round of limited value in that environment. The Gyurza round that passed through the armour of the officer on the hospital table in 1993 was the same design principle applied to a criminal's advantage. The engineers at Klimovsk applied the same principle to law enforcement's advantage. The weapon and the problem that created it are directly connected. The early 1990s produced a Russia in which military-grade protection was available to non-military actors. The state security services found themselves in a conflict where the standard-issue pistol they carried was at a fundamental disadvantage against people who should not have been their tactical equals. The answer that Serdyukov produced was a cartridge that changed its behavior depending on what it met. One bullet, two outcomes. For the targets who did not wear armor, the wound was wide and the damage was immediate. For the targets who did wear armor, the sleeve came off and the core continued. The Makarov that the Russian police officer had been carrying on the day he was shot through his vest weighed less than the SR-1. It was simpler to produce, cheaper to supply, and in the context of 1946, when it was designed, entirely adequate. In 1993, it was not adequate. The criminals who shot through his vest understood this before the Russian state did. The pistol named after a viper was the answer the state eventually reached. The army rejected it. The FSB kept it. The men who stand between the Russian president and everyone else carry it every day. The officer who survived being shot through his armor recovered. The rounds that passed through him were 9 by 18mm Makarov rounds, fired from a weapon his attacker had obtained from a former military surplus supply. The irony is specific. He was shot by the weapon the state issued to people like him, fired by someone who should not have had it, and his armor failed because the round was designed in 1946 for a different problem. The Gyurza was designed in the 1990s for the problem that replaced it.